A very good evening.
Good evening, Masa. Thank you so much for having us. Happy 7th birthday.
Oh, yes. Happy 7th to Newsroom Africa. We are growing. Thank you very much for those well wishes. And let's just start with what we saw yesterday, tempers flaring again with people hitting the streets. Of course, rightfully, a lot of anger regarding the disappearance of Mazwikubeka as well. Just highlighting and again bringing to the fore the problems faced in your sector. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, remember as TEXA, our mandate, TEXA, which is Township Economy Commission SA, our mandate is to transform, develop, grow, and protect township economy. And then this issue, it talks about protecting township economy in terms of making sure that the MSMEs in the township, the micro, small, medium enterprises, the entrepreneurs are protected in terms of the space that they're in. As you know, the township economy, it's a huge elephant in the room because of its size. Now everybody flocking into, tapping into the very same industry. Now it's concerning when businesses and entrepreneurs are not safe, most especially when you look at the crime that are happening around businesses in the township. It calls for a concern.
Now, you know, you're speaking about, of course, as TEXA, you've been calling on the protection of the township economy, which includes the protection of the business owners in townships as well. Taking a look at this recent case of Mazwikubeka as well, and seeing how government we saw how government officials also rushed there yesterday. But prior to that, how would you then rate that protection of South African business owners in the townships?
This is why we always reach out to government to say, look, as TEXA, we've positioned ourselves as the gateway to the township and the township economy. We are calling for government to partner and collaborate with us so that we look at what we call the business against crime in the township, because at the end of the day it becomes difficult to aspire young people who wants to get into the space if it's not safe to be in the space. That is why it is a serious concern to make sure that the businesses in the townships are protected, but we also need to make sure as businesses and as organized business formations in the township, we also come together and really come up with a real solution in terms of the challenges that we're facing in terms of the business against crime in the townships.
And with all that you have called on from government, going back to the protection as well, what responses do you get from them? Yeah,
it's looking very warm. I'll just take you back to the conference that we had at Bheki, the National Economic Development Summit that took place, I think, 2 weeks back. One of the things that the president talked about was making sure that there's ease of doing business in the township. Obviously, one of those elements is to make sure that businesses in the townships are protected, making sure that we work very closely with the authorities, most especially the law enforcement authorities, to make sure that even the private companies, we are also calling from the private security companies as well to come and play, the role in making sure that the businesses are protected, because it's not easy to grow township and rural economy if the situation is the way it is, currently.
With this current situation, there's a plethora of problems here, from, regulating the industry to formalizing it when it comes to funding as well. Not so long ago, we had, multiple reports about the health element of the Spaza shops as well. Lots of furor when it came to that too. Then there was this massive drive to get people to get licensed to be able to own and operate a Spaza shop. From your perspective, also being on the ground, are these laws that we have being implemented, are we now operating with people who have licenses, or are we just waiting for the next outbreak, for instance, to take place, where now we've got more children who have died?
Honestly, that's a good question, Masa. But honestly, this whole issue of registering of Spaza shop, it's not happening the way it's supposed to. For example, as the president said, regulations are too stiff for the businesses. You look at the requirements that you need to register Spaza shop. most of the people, they can't really meet those requirements. And the process as well is not in favor of the people on the ground. Can you imagine if you need to get, building plans for you to have that Spaza shop, the title deed. When you look at our families and the history of our families, it's not easy to have those title deeds. You understand? Looking at all the requirements that for you to be registered as a formal Spaza shop is not easy. Now, that is why we're saying those red tapes and those bottlenecks, they're stifling the businesses to be able to start and operate. It needs, for example, running a Spaza shop is not it doesn't need a rocket science to be able to put together that. Now, but the regulations and the bylaws, it makes it very difficult for people to register those Spaza shops. This is why we're calling for government to tell us how many Spaza shops have been registered. And also, you remember the 500 million rand Spaza shop support fund. We don't know how many people have received those funds, but on our side, people come to us talking about this, support, which is not happening. That is why we're saying we can't keep on, introducing these funds, but at the end of the day, we don't see the impact on the ground. We need to see the impact on the ground so that at the end of the day, people are able to run their businesses and take both the township and the rural economy to the next level.
I just received some what clearly is breaking news on my phone. I think we should share it while we're doing this interview. It's quite appropriate, and I'll read it with you. That Lieutenant General Mtombeni has just announced that Mazwi Kubeka, who was allegedly kidnapped after a Spaza shop dispute, has been found and is at the Vosloorus police station. He apparently presented himself at the police station this evening, and investigations are still ongoing. So that is breaking news that we've just received right now on my phone to say that businessman Mazwi Kubeka has been found, and he's been found alive, which is obviously great news there. Any reaction to that?
Yeah, it's a relief, because at the end of the day, losing one life, it's too many. Most especially in the space where we're saying we're encouraging as many young people to come in, become job creators rather than job seekers. Losing a soldier like him was going to be a disaster. That is why we're saying we're very excited, we're happy, and then we make sure that things like this, they don't happen again. Let's protect ourselves. Let's support ourselves as well. As I always say to South Africans, I think it's time for us to support our own. But also as business people, let's make sure that we do things the right way in terms of, the service, the customer care, the pricing, and we were able to look after our customers so that we are able to get support from our own people as well. Because we are saying, up until we support each other, we're not going to win this battle. We need really to support each other so that we're able to make sure that at the end of the day, we close the space in terms of creating as many jobs as possible by creating as many job creators as possible.
I mean, do you also think that with this news that's coming, you're talking about the township economy and just this ecosystem that flows. We saw with these protests, with the anger that had flared up over the disappearance of Mazwi, that, some tuck shops, some Spaza shops were closed down. That obviously halts some economic activity in the township as well. And there were those threats to say that if he doesn't return, they will close the local Spaza shops, specifically of foreign nationals. Do you think that now that he has, resurfaced and he is apparently okay and alive, that will quell some of the tensions and we'll start to see that economic activity just come back to the fore?
Yeah, you remember the Spaza shop issue? It's a very thorny one, and it's a very serious one that government and all the relevant stakeholders, we really need to come, together, come into the room and really come up with the lasting solutions into the space, because it's a very volatile situation out there. Now, that is why we're really asking for government and all the stakeholders, even the private sector, to come on board and really rest this situation, because if we don't do that, it's a ticking bomb. That is why we are calling, as TEXA, we are calling for all relevant stakeholders to come to the room and come up with impactful solutions into the into this industry. It's a very important industry. It's worth about 150 to 180 billion rand per annum. That is why it's very interesting, for many people to come into the space. But we need to make sure, how do we make sure that the playing field is level?
And just before I let you go, Mr. Thwala, as well, before we also got this breaking news that Mazwi Kubeka has been found, and I'm sure we'll get more information as that story develops as well. You were talking about that 500 million rand that the president had spoken about being invested as well in the township economy, and you're saying you still don't know where exactly that has gone. But I remember at the time you welcomed this, but you had also been concerned then to say 500 million rand, when we're talking about an industry that's worth billions is not much. You were actually calling that it should be something like 5 billion rand that's needed.
Yeah, that is why we're calling for private sector also to come on board and have a blended finance in terms of if the government puts about 500 million rand, we also need to have other money that comes in because it's not enough. But also at the end of the day, the challenge, Masa, that we're facing, we're not sitting in those tables that make this decision, even in the board that decide how to distribute that money. Township businesses and township economies, we are not sitting in those tables. That is why it's very difficult even to get feedback in terms of what are the bottlenecks, where are we, what are the situation, and the communication and the messaging is not out there so that people, they understand exactly where are we in terms of that Spaza Shop Support Fund, because people are sitting, and unfortunately we are the one that assisted the government to do that event, in Soweto. We've called people in. We had more than 1,500 people coming in to listen to both the Minister of Small Business Development and the Minister of DTIC when they were launching this project. And people were excited. But what happened to that excitement? That excitement is no longer there. We're saying we need to be consistent in terms of this particular issues, because people are really looking forward to receive this fund so that they're able to develop their businesses.
It would be amiss also not to mention this. There've clearly been tensions between local business owners and those of foreign nationality. The case of Mazwi as well brought that to the fore, and we saw those altercations between locals and foreign nationals as well. And that tension that just kind of still lives there. You were talking about just how these bottlenecks and just the process of getting the licensing is quite rigid for locals as well. What can we learn from a case like this? What can government learn from this case? Because there was a lot of speculation as to what had happened to him. We'll obviously be hearing in greater detail what exactly has transpired. But there were clearly these tensions. And as the president of the Township Economic Commission of South Africa, what's your views regarding these tensions between the locals and foreign nationals?
Yeah, as I said earlier on, it's a serious challenge that we are facing that really needs a serious intervention where we bring all the relevant stakeholders on the table and discuss this thing and come up with the solution. Because at the end of the day, remember what happened in 2021 with the looting. We don't want a situation whereby the country also goes to that kind of situations. This thing needs to be prevented. We need to make sure that the intelligence in terms of in the country, they're able to see those things, they're able to engage and make sure that we prevent such situations. That is why we always say prevention is better than cure. It's very important to make sure that the challenge, because the challenge is out there, you could see it. What are the solutions? Who's driving this? Because the Department of COGTA, the Department of Small Businesses, the Department of DTIC, they really need to come together and make sure that they engage with the people on the ground and come up with the solution. Because there is a solution, but what will be the solution? Everybody must come together, let's craft the solution so that we arrest this situation.
I think that's a perfect note to end it on. Mr. Thwala, thank you so much for your time and coming into studio.
Thank you so much.
That was the president of TEXA, the Township Economic Commission of South Africa, Bheki Thwala.